Welcome back. You're watching this special coverage here on Citizen Television. Budget 2025-26. The Treasury Cabinet Secretary John Mbadi, who we have been keeping track of his movements, is now at the National Treasury. Today he is expected to table a budget statement containing the spending plans of at least 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings today. The statement that will be delivered at the National Assembly is expected to highlight the government's spending priorities for the financial year starting 1st of July 2025 and ending on the 30th of June 2026, and the proposed measures to fund the budget. And with me in studio, the gentleman and the two ladies, Dr. Grace Kamau, Alex Kanyi and Lydia, are with us in studio this morning to take stock of what then this means. Coming to you, Alex, the funding and the question of then how to fund. First, let's begin with the deficit, and of the more than 800 billion Kenya shillings, more than 500 will come from the domestic market. We've just talked about the creation of employment and the private sector performance. Ideally then, if that comes from the domestic market, it crowds out the private sector, is it? And what are the consequences?
Yeah, I think just to take us a little bit back, when government was borrowing from the domestic market at very high rates, be it in your infrastructure bond, be it in your treasury bills. So we saw the effect in terms of then the government crowding out everybody else, and it was actually more profitable to lend to the government than to lend to anyone. And I'm sure financial institutions followed suit. They would have preferred to lend to the government as opposed to you and I, perhaps, who would have been evaluated as risky. And some people could not pay back the money from those financial institutions. While the rates have come down to what we now see from the 18% to now almost below 10% for treasury bills and etc. So that is a positive move, but again, from the deficit, like you say, government will definitely have to borrow again from the domestic market and internationally to just make sure that they meet the budget deficit. But again, this deficit problem is not new, just like the revenue problem that you were speaking about. And I just want to go through a few numbers courtesy of Budgety Hub. So financial year 2017-2018, we had a deficit of 60 billion, 608 billion. 1920, we had a 721 billion deficit. 2020-2021, we had a deficit of 791 billion. 2021-2022, we had a deficit of 950 billion. 2022-2023, a deficit of 748 billion. 2023-2024, 835 billion. 2024-2025, this is 887 billion. 2025-2026, which is the year we are getting into, 876 or thereabout billion. So clearly you can see
17-18 is 608 billion.
17-18, yes, 608 billion.
18-19,
721. Moving to 791 in 2021, so 2020-2021.
Okay.
21-22 was the highest at 950 billion, and it's, I guess, the COVID period.
Yeah.
Then you move to 748 billion
in 22-3.
22-3. 23-4, 835.
4-5.
Then 4-5, 887. Then 5-6, 876 billion. So this deficit problem clearly has been there with us for quite a long time. This is more than 5 years back, yes. Almost going to 9 years. Yeah, 2025 going back to 2017. So you clearly see then a trend to actually plan to borrow without telling us we're actually going to borrow.
Yeah.
So when you think about our debt of 10.58 trillion as at 2024, yes, which I'm sure has grown to about 11 trillion, from 10.58 trillion in 2024 to around 11 trillion now, you just wonder, because there must be a problem. There must be a problem in terms of how we are doing our budgeting. The minister, cabinet secretary this time actually insisted that we are going to do a zero-based budgeting. I was hoping that for once that zero-based budgeting would then provide a solution towards deficits. To then say, this is what we've been carrying, 25-26, because of zero-based budgeting, we are actually trying to resolve the issue of carrying a deficit. But again, it's not working. So it's clearly evident that we are living beyond our means as a country. And it's a task that perhaps we hope the CS will be addressing today when he does his actual speech. But when you now move on to the actual line items in the budget, I can appreciate the kind of problem that he has. Because if you were to be asked, then what do you chop off? Again, you have a big problem deciding that this program is the one that we don't think is important. So we need to do something around how we are budgeting. Otherwise, we need to stop digging. We need to stop digging.
And then, Alex, the question is then, how did we get here? Because this is over how many financial years? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the 8th financial year. And it spans across also the previous administration. If we are to trace the original scene of the budget deficits, how then, the question is, did we get here? How are we finding ourselves in this position?
No, it's been growing steadily in terms of our borrowing. And again, thanks to Central Bank of Kenya and their numbers, in terms of the public debt and how it's been growing over the years. It's been growing. We were at about 2.42 trillion in 2014. We are talking about 10.58 as at 2024. In 10 years, we've increased our public debt by about 8 trillion. While the story has been that I inherited debt, and perhaps you want that to be the excuse, in the current government, in terms of just your borrowing, again, it shows we really have a problem. Either what you are reporting as having been collected is wrong, not accurate, not true, or on the budget side, then we have a lot of wastage or money that is not being put to good use. Because if, for example, I started a project, say in the previous regime, and in the next regime, I'm still allocating huge sums of money to the same project, and it's not getting completed, and someone then inherits the same and perhaps budgets for the same again and again and again, there's a problem around wastage and how we are using our public resources. At some point, we must decide that we really need to take very, very good action around wastage of resources and corruption. And I hope that in today's speech, we want to see clear actions around how do we deal with entities or agencies that are just wasting public funds. How do we deal with corruption cases and put more enforcement action around asset recovery? And to be even more radical, is it time that we even introduced life imprisonment for corruption? Go the China route.
We seem to be copying
China route is even tougher.
Of Lee Kuan Yew, as well as how Singapore was lifted from the depths of despair to the great heights of hope by Lee Kuan Yew. But hardly do you see members of the political establishment also fancy his methods of improving the economy, which was investment in education, appreciating competency, killing corruption, and also putting the money where the priority areas are. Dr. Grace, Alex brings up this pertinent point, but ideally then, looking at the deficit as tabulated, it's 4.5% of our gross domestic product, the GDP. And this, with the government set to borrow externally 284.2 billion, while the domestic borrowing will be set at 591.9 billion Kenya shillings. The consequences are immense, is it?
Yes, definitely the consequences are immense. But before even I talk about that, I want to talk about the whole, how we find ourselves where we are. And sometimes, whereas we expect very, very much from the CES, from our leaders, sometimes also it's good to also put ourselves in their shoes and see where they're also coming from. That there is a proportion of the 4.2 trillion. Actually, I think over 1 trillion is actually going towards debt repayment. And that is a matter that we cannot put a blind eye on, that in as much as this budget could comfortably have been 3.1 or 3 billion flat, or even 2.9 trillion. But we have over 1 trillion that goes towards debt repayment, which we cannot default. And much of that debt is actually external debt, which is even denominated in foreign currency and many other disadvantages that comes with it. So in as much as we find ourselves in the hole, and I agree with Alex that we really must stop digging the hole, is also to look at how that we have a big proportion of the budget actually going towards the repayment of the debt that is already inherited, but we must be able to do something about it. And one of the things I'm happy about the current budget, it's not great effort, but at least it is effort towards the right direction, is that there is at least some reduction in terms of the amount of deficit that we see in the 2025-2026 financial year from where we had. It may be 11 billion, it may be less, but at least if we could start that trend, as opposed to now it would have probably have gone to 900 billion in terms of deficit. So I think that I applaud the CES to say that we have at least started moving towards the right direction in terms of reduction of the debt. But going to the repercussions of borrowing a big proportion of that budget proportionately, from the CS point of view, or from the country point of view, from the National Treasury point of view, borrowing domestically is very good. Why? Because the domestic borrowing is denominated, first of all, in the local currency. That means then the issues that we used to have and that we've been dealing with the external debts, wherever there is fluctuation in the foreign currency, then that is not there. Number two is that you can always restructure within yourselves, and then it also works in a way in reducing the rate of inflation, although marginally. But I think the misgivings of that is more grave than the advantages that you draw from that, because government generally, whether from a commercial bank point of view or from even individual, the high net worth individuals, is always considered as a risk-free lender. So every time the government comes in for the money, they will get all the money they want, whether it is from commercial banks or from everybody else, because that is risk-free. And most investors would definitely prefer somewhere where there is no risk, even if the returns may not be very high. So therefore, what that means, then they mop up the liquidity that is within the market and use it for their use. And therefore, we have now a problem in terms of especially the micro, small and medium enterprises being able to access credit, because they are considered to be the highest risk. Of course, we have also the other private sector entities that will now be able to, their level of accessing the credit then becomes limited. So if the private sector comes and mop up whatever else was remaining, then the small and medium enterprises, they have to shut down, because and those are the ones that really require the credit, because they need the credit today. I know there are people who borrow today, they go, they buy something, they sell and actually return in the evening. So I think it really denies that opportunity. And looking at the role that the SMEs are playing in the economy in terms of employment, in terms of their contribution towards the GDP, then it is it's not a very positive way, especially when you look at growing the country.
And Lydia, I'll come to you on what that crowding out then means, because interest rate is high, but you realize the banking sector is making huge profits, which then explains the reason that I'll be posing that question to you. But first here is what the Treasury Principal Secretary, Dr. Chris Kiptoo, earlier on told my colleagues Jimmy Mbogo and Felix Orare at the National Treasury.
Yeah, This year, as we know, we've just come from a very difficult time because we ended the year last year with a bit of demonstrations because of the finance bill, and we had about 2 or 3 months that economic activity went down. But from then on, we have picked up, and I think you know the GDP growth rate is around 4.7%. Yeah. And we also see that the macroeconomic front has markedly improved. We see inflation now is around 3.8%. Mm-hmm. Interest rates have come down. We see foreign exchange reserves have gone up in central bank, yeah. And generally it's marked improvement. But the challenge is that spending pressures are still very high, yeah. And yet revenue-raising measures are not really much, because we decided this time around that we need to be sensitive, mm-hmm. to what Kenyans said last year, yeah. And so the finance bill that we came up this time was not more about raising revenues, but more, yeah. about just making sure that we address equity, mm-hmm. and issues around clarity of clauses within the bill. We have focused more on better, bottom-up economic transformation, yeah. agenda, and the specific agenda, budgetary allocations we have given, mm-hmm. like fertilizer subsidy program. And in the education sector, for instance, we have tried to prioritize key areas such as free day secondary school, mm-hmm. free junior JSS, and also free primary. Then on the health sector, we have security sector also, which is taking a huge chunk of the amount of money. Yeah. We have tried to address on manufacturing. We have also areas around transport and roads, and more importantly also around agriculture, mm-hmm. and food security. Yes. So you will see this is a budget of about 4.2 trillion. Yeah. And out of that, a huge chunk of it is actually going to serve a state.
Dr. Chris Kipto there in the company of my colleague on his reflections ahead of budget presentation at the National Assembly by the Treasury Cabinet Secretary CPA John Mbadi. The Principal Secretary himself will be in the company of the team and the delegation that will be making the short trip from the National Treasury to the National Assembly for the delivery of that statement. Lydia, Dr. Grace pointed out the crowding out consequence. And there's one big problem that is overlooked somewhat also in this budget, which is the pending bills headache and the inability, the lacking circulation of currency in the market and the financial system. Is this not a priority area as such that many businesses are suffering and hasn't come to the attention of the mandarins at the National Treasury?
Yeah. I think before we move on to the pending bills discussion, yes. Just to close out on what my colleagues here have talked about on the deficit, the key question is whether we are borrowing sustainably and how we are spending the money that we are borrowing. So if I just go back to the comments that we received from the audience, there's a lot of reference to misplaced priorities, budgeted corruption, silence on executive wastage. So the feeling already within the country is that even as we plan and work out the budget, are we really spending sustainably? Are we using the money that we intend to allocate to the various sectors, and are we using that? And have we prioritized our budget? So I think overall, then it becomes a trust issue within the country, that even as we are working towards borrowing domestically, I think there's about 850 that is expected to be borrowed from the domestic market, and about 246 billion. Mm-hmm. Then the question then becomes whether we are spending that wisely. Yeah. So then going back to the pending bills discussion.
Yes. Before you respond to that, allow me to engage my colleague. I will proceed. Melita Oletenges, who is outside the National Treasury. Jimmy is with the CS. Melita joins us from the entrance of the National Treasury. Good morning, Melita. Last year, a time like this, handful of demonstrators were outside where you are. How is the environment there?
of the National Treasury, where we expect this is the nerve center of all the activities that are going to roll out today, where we expect the journey of the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Treasury, John Mbadi, will begin here heading to Parliament, where he is expected to read his maiden speech. And what we are witnessing here, Ayub, is just final touches in readiness for that march from the Treasury, and we expect him, of course, to stand here with the signature briefcase pose before heading out, of course, to Parliament, which is just about 500 meters away. And you can see here security has been bolstered. We've seen officials of the Treasury filtering in and out of the premise just to ensure that all is set. And of course, you have our team already inside keeping tabs on what is happening inside. And we are outside here just trying to see the mood as well of the people who are also anticipating just to hear how the 2025-2026 budget will affect them. Of course, it has been a long journey here, Ayub. Of course, the people involved, the technocrats in government, and particularly in Treasury, are trying to put this together. You know, a budget that many Kenyans are pregnant with expectation, while many as well feel that they have been let down in terms of the different dockets, state departments that have been affected by budget cuts. Talk about education, university education, high school, as well as primary education. And there has been that issue of capitation and how it will affect students and pupils in different institutions. And of course, it is of great concern to parents. But of course, we shall be tracking how the Treasury and the Cabinet Secretary will be speaking about this going forward. Of course, we also had dissenting voices about not only what is happening here today, but in regards to the murder of Albert Ojwang, and we had activists yesterday coming out saying that they shall be demonstrating here even as we expect the budget reading. So we are keeping an eye on that. We are, of course, your ears and eyes on the ground just to see how that will pan out. But of course, remember, the Kenyans are still, talking about this 4.239 trillion budget, which is with the recurrent expenditure about over 70% or thereabout, and the deficit there in terms of development expenditure is what many Kenyans are saying that we still lag behind in terms of development. And as much as we are raising this money from debt, on-source revenue, and things like that, we are still lagging behind when it comes to, of course, spending money in development projects. So we are keeping our eyes here, that door, and of course that is where we expect the CS Treasury, John Mbadi, to come out from before heading to Parliament. So Ayub, that is the situation here right outside Treasury. As at now, we shall be keeping tabs and bringing our viewers up to speed. For now, back to you in studio, Ayub.
Melita, good morning and thanks for the update. Yes, Lydia, you had a point on the pending bills.
Yeah. So overall, these pending bills represent real people. People who we were discussing with my colleagues during the break, who've taken out loans to supply to the governments and the various government offices. So what this means is that as a startup, if you have perhaps taken out a loan to provide services and the government is taking, or these unpaid bills spanning years or months to pay, it stifles the growth of your business. You need money to be able to even overall spurring economic growth. So overall, then this needs to be checked. There's quite, I think, about 500 billion in outstanding pending bills. So then there's a need to fast track this to enhance economic growth for these businesses that are starting. The finance bill has proposed a reduction in tax rates for startups, but if this continues as a trend, then overall, then what benefit would that have if there's no money these businesses are receiving, and at the end of the day, you're expected to still pay tax on these said unpaid bills that take quite some time to receive payments. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Alex.
There's on the pending bills issue, course, the audit revealed, the one that is ongoing, that out of the 700 billion, it's 200 billion that perhaps is due for payment. Yeah. So that introduces a few issues. Number one is whether the amounts in those pending bills are fair or they are accurate. Of course, if you just do a percentage of 2/7, just shows that perhaps whatever is being claimed as a pending bill is perhaps not a pending bill, or there's lack of proper documentation. For example, to show that there was an order from a government agency, then I supplied the goods. If it were goods, the goods were delivered, they were received. If someone does an audit, to just check whether even one of those goods is there, they're able to see, or to check if they're actually being utilized, they're able to see that. So I guess those are the kind of gaps that we see on that particular section, but we actually laud the work that is being done to just verify the pending bills, and we saw the President set up a committee to just do that. The other challenge around pending bills is the fact that government is already complaining that the price of the goods that they get is actually coming at a very inflated price. And the reason why I think that is so is because government is also taking too long to pay. So if I'm supplying to the government, then I have to think of, within what time will I be paid, and therefore I kind of put a markup, especially if I'm borrowing to pay, borrowing to actually supply the goods or services to the government. So that's another issue that is coming up. And finally, the other issue that is also coming up is people who are genuinely providing the goods and services to the government, and then the government is actually not paying. Because if then I borrow money to supply goods to the government, and then the government doesn't pay me, it means then the bank that perhaps advanced the credit to me will be on my neck. And if they're on my neck, then perhaps I also close down my business. So these are kind of the challenges that we see with pending bills that we hope CS Mbadi will have a chance to resolve. But also, to be fair to him, I think this is his first budget. Yeah. And going by the goodwill that he is showing, we hope that we'll soon see the results. I hope it just doesn't get swallowed by the system.
And Dr. Grace, coming to you, I'm looking at the agriculture sector, rural and urban development, 78 billion Kenya shillings, 3% of the total budget. Ideally, this is not commensurate with the value, because the budget policy statement was very high on value addition, yet you have a sector like agriculture getting a paltry 78 billion. Doesn't match up, is it?
Thank you, Ayub, and allow me to also add my voice on the pending bills menace, and I think this is really big. And apart from it being stifling some businesses, actually I know many small and medium enterprises that have had to shut down because really you can't continue operating. And looking at the proportion, I think in the government they have been trying to allocate at least 15% of their procurement coming from either the vulnerable, the small, the medium, the people with disability, women, and the marginalized sectors of the economy. And looking at that population then not being paid, I think it's really something that should have been addressed. And what we would have expected it to be, and I think we've seen this in the previous finance bills, where it becomes a fast charge, that the first thing you do is to pay whatever is pending, whether it is in the county government, in the government, or in the ministries, so that then it is paid. But allow me to also just note one of the things that has been brought on board in this finance bill is the fast tracking of the implementation of accrual accounting. And I know this is one of the areas that the public will say that we have got very technical. But when we bring in the accrual accounting, is that where you bring everybody, every transaction into the fore, so that whether there is a change, for instance, in a county government, then whatever liabilities and assets that were left by the previous administration. Even from a national point of view, they are all brought to the book, and therefore prudence dictates that they become a fast charge before you can be able to pay anything. Because we've seen a lot of projects, wherever there are changes in administration, especially at the county level. So there is a project that was almost being completed. Maybe it was completed, it was a hospital, and what was remaining is only putting in the instruments and the infrastructure. And when the new governor comes in or a new administration comes in, then they go out with their manifesto and they start up all over a new project, whereas it would have taken a very small amount to complete and pay whatever pending bills there is. So I'm very happy that the fast tracking of the accrual accounting is part of what the priority areas of this budget, which will therefore see a lot of whatever assets and liabilities being brought to the fore. Now, going to misplacement of priorities, let me call it that way because one of the viewers has actually said there are a lot of misplaced priorities. I think when you look at how much has been allocated to agriculture and looking at what we are looking to achieve, and I know the better agenda has been very key in terms of food security, then it looks very, very minimal, and it looks like it may not really be able to meet then that particular agenda that we expect to achieve. And I want to tie this to manufacturing, which also has a relatively low budget allocation, and yet we are looking at how we can create employment for agriculture. I think I look at it from twofold. One is that we need to be food secure. Whether it is the food production, whether it is from the staple, from ensuring that we have enough food for ourselves. When you look at the level of imports that we are doing, I think even from our neighbors, including onions, oranges, fruits and vegetables that we could comfortably be able to grow. Why should we be importing that and such foods that we can be able to produce locally, and yet we are crying of unemployment and also not being able to have enough for ourselves. And also looking at the agriculture, I had expected that the agriculture would have slightly more, because beyond the producing, then how can we add value to what we are currently producing and be able to then fetch more, even for our exports? When you look at our tea and our coffee, a lot of other nations are just coming and taking it through. They go and just do some little processing, and they multiply that by, I think, 100 times, and they're able to sell. So I was looking at it from that fold, and also looking at the level of creating employment. We have a lot of young people who are educated, they don't know what to do, but if there was the ripple effect of just having a good agricultural industry and also the manufacturing industry working, then we'll have many of these then absorbed in these particular sectors and address many problems currently.
And Lydia, given that there is the glaring aspect of, as Alex pointed out, in the financial years, the deficit and the inability to meet the revenue targets, also the question of inconsistencies in our taxation regime. This is despite the national tax policy being clear on the same. How has this been a detriment to investors and manufacturers who are unable to make that decision because of the irregular manner of our taxation regime, which is unpredictable? Yeah,
it's a good question. So if you look at the medium revenue strategy that had been put in place, it was meant to be staggered, effective July 2024 to 2027. So we expected to see proposals being introduced through the various finance bills over the period of 3 years. So there's a disconnect between the national tax policy, the medium revenue strategy, and what we are seeing in the finance bill. So what we saw last year was that part of what had been proposed, or the strategies, or what was within the strategy, part of that was introduced in the finance bill. However, this was, more favorable, if we could call it that, to the tax authorities. We expected to see expansion of the tax brackets on personal income taxes. This was not implemented. However, there were some proposals to increase, for example, VAT on insurance services, which is one of the strategies that had been proposed or was within the medium revenue strategy. So in terms of providing certainty for investors, it's tax ideally should be, you know, as an investor, I want to come into a country knowing if I put in a plant worth 10 billion shillings, tomorrow the tax laws will not change, and if I projected on my financial model for the 5 years, I expected a return of a certain amount,
yes,
based on what was in place at the time of investment. Mm-hmm. So what we are seeing is that there's a constant shift in the tax laws without considering what already existing investors have done. So perhaps what needs to be considered is maybe transitionary provisions that if as an investor I've come in knowing that in the next 5 years, this is what I expect from a business perspective, no additional taxes from a VAT point of view. We are seeing a lot of changes from exempt to zero rated. I know we've talked about this for the better part of this morning, but it's very critical for investors having certainty as they come into, you know, as they invest in a country for planning purposes. So essentially, what we would expect is perhaps streamline the various tax provisions. What we have in the medium revenue strategy, can that be streamlined with the national tax policy and perhaps the proposals that we are seeing in the finance bill? Yeah. And
Alex, how do you address wastage? State House is allocated 8.5 billion, 7.6 will be recurrent, 894 million development. The Office of the President, 5.3 billion, 3.8 will go to recurrent, 1.5 for development. The Office of the Deputy President, 2.9 billion, 2.8 of that money will go to recurrent, and 100 million Kenya shillings for development. Can this be rediverted? Can this be addressed, given what the Control of Budget year in, year out points out in our report of the billions that end up being spent on foreign and domestic travels? Yet you have critical sectors like primary healthcare, which was allocated only 13 billion Kenya shillings, to the detriment of stakeholders who say that's not enough.
I think out of goodwill, we should see the president coming out to say, I've heard you, because I think this has been debated a long time, to say we think there's a lot of money, for example, going towards just ensuring that the facilities in State House are in good, good position. However, we note that the allocation for, say, renovation has been has been done for over a period of time. And people actually wonder, for example, if you say we are allocating 1 billion to State House for development, what exactly is State House actually developing? Yeah. I don't know, if for those who've been there, and I've been there, I think once, you can clearly say that, and if you're to even buy some property wherever and start building a whole new structure, vis-a-vis how much is being allocated to just renovation, you can start asking the hard questions as to whether this money is actually being put to good use or being budgeted properly. So like you say, out of goodwill, I think our leader should be able to say that I have seen what you're telling me in terms of allocation to State House. Out of this, and in good conversation with the CS National Treasury, I think we could perhaps cut off a chunk of, say, 20% to go to, say, school feeding program, which is reducing from 3.6 billion in 2025 to 3 billion in 2025-2026. And school feeding is basically a meal to a child of about 50 shillings. Or, the cost is actually like 37 to 50 shillings per student. And you can imagine what just 600 billion, which is being removed, if it was just to be reinstated, it could do in terms of the effect for those school children. So definitely the money can be put to better use. And just something before I close, Oni, I think we'll get back to it around the borrowing and what the Auditor General is saying.
Yes, and coming to you, Dr. Grace, ideally what Alex points out is very pertinent, is it? Because also the nod has been given to the DCA, for example, for 100 million Kenya shillings to snoop on our internet posts and SIM card use. And this is of concern, is it, because it's encroaching on our freedoms as Kenyans and how we express ourselves. And you have seen also the op-eds by the Foreign Affairs CS and the Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi. This is another misplaced priority, is it, wanting to have a control over what people post, hear, see and read?
Thank you, Ayub. And I wouldn't say in entirety that the allocation, actually, if you look at the allocation in the priorities, I think the national security, I think it is the second or third in terms of high level of allocation in terms of the budget as a priority area. And I don't want to say in entirety that allocation in security is a waste, because then if a country is not secure within its borders and even beyond, then there is so much that you cannot be able to achieve, including the development and the peaceful coexistence that we all desire as a way of defining ourselves as a civilized and developed country. But going into the granular and looking at what each of the items then would entail, then definitely I would say there could be a real look into how the various line items have been allocated, whether it is from a development point of view or from a recurrent. Of course, the greatest proportion of it going to recurrent. And we could look at what we really need this information for. Is it for intelligence so that we can get protection? Mm-hmm. Or is it for use so that then we can see a bit of what has been playing along? So if that information was used in the right way, and I know there's a whole chapter on data protection that has been talked about as to how much secure are our data, how much information is being used in the right way. Because if this information was to be used in the right way, whereby we can, for example, be able using intelligence to know, like maybe an Al-Shabaab attack is just about to happen. And we've seen a bit of that. Sometimes I think back we would get intelligence and say, you're not required in this and this area, be cautious about it. Then that would be the right use. Okay. But if it was to be used just maybe to harass a few people, I think that will definitely not be rightful.
And that's the fear many Kenyans have, Dr. Grace. So allow us to cross over to Parliament, where my colleague Emmanuel Tor is standing by. Good morning, Emmanuel. Certainly Parliament will be the point of attention today. What can you tell us?
Well, thank you very much, Ayub. As you have rightly put it, it is going to be the focus, the main point of concern as the Secretary, the CS for Finance and Treasury, that is John Mbadi, comes in to read the first budget under the broad-based government. They're calling it the broad-based budget, but we wait to see what is in it. Already we have seen activities here in Parliament. We are the National Assembly main entrance, where most of those activities are going to happen. And of course, it is a beehive of activities as the members of Parliament and of course the House prepares to receive that budget. Remember, Parliament also has some other roles. Remember, they're supposed to do representation, oversight, and of course representation, oversight, and also the other functions that they also perform depending on what their mandate is. And of course, we are here to see what they are going to do. Right now, most of them are holed up in committee rooms. Remember, there's that issue of Albert Omondi Ojwang, which has clouded this budget day with members of Parliament asking questions. And yesterday it was the day for the Senate, and today the National Assembly is having a chance to also ask the questions and get the answers from the Inspector General of Police, Douglas Kanja, and the Security Committee, which you have actually talked about, is actually dealing with that matter as we speak, with the IG appearing. But the most important thing is to check how much they're going to be allocated to ensure that we are safe, and to see how much is going to be spent prudently, not to advance police brutality as we have seen in the past few days since that issue broke out, and how the country has been on high alert about police brutality. And of course, other issues that we expect to also take shape is the concerns about the ballooning public debt, which has crossed the 11 trillion shilling mark. And of course, in this current financial year that we are coming into, we are going to borrow another 700 or 800 billion shillings, and we are going to repay 1.1 trillion shillings or thereabout, which means that we are borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and also just going around in circles. But this is something that is going to take time to really deal with because we are over and above the ceiling. And of course, we're going to go back to you, Ayub, because we'll be monitoring and giving you the details as they transpire here in Parliament. Ayub.
Emmanuel, thank you, and good morning to you, giving us the outlook of the business before Parliament today. And that includes the presentation that will be done by John Mbadi, the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary, who will be delivering the budget statement that contains the spending plans for the 4.2 trillion Kenya shillings for the financial year, starting the 1st of July this year, and which will end on the 30th of June next year in 2026. Your final comments here, starting with you, Lydia.
Yeah. Right. So just to close, I think it's important to mention that a good tax, changes in tax laws make it very, it's a very uncertain business environment for both taxpayers, businesses, individuals, to say the least. Mm-hmm. So in order for us to have growth, real growth, we need a sustainable and consistent tax system. I think we've talked about this earlier, that as opposed to very frequent tax shifts, we've seen countries like Ethiopia that work with tax laws for 5 years without having to change. So imagine businesses having to keep up each year. In between that, you have a finance bill, you have a finance act, you have a tax amendment act. So it's important to have a consistent or predictable tax system.
Yes.
For planning purposes for businesses and individuals.
Yes.
At hand.
Yes, Alex.
I think on the expenditure side for this budget, going by the budget summary, things around e-mobility, fertilizer subsidy, affordable housing, things to do with school feeding, intern doctors and getting them paid, industrial parks for industrialization, the cash to the elderly, 25 billion or thereabout. There is even plan to just deal with sanitary towels of about 940 million. We can actually see good plans by the government to put money to good use, while there are others which, of course, are questionable and, like putting in more money into Hustler Fund when already the reports is it's not doing so well and people are not paying. I guess those are some of the areas we need to look at. There's the duplication of just putting money into CDF. President has his own bursary. MCAs want also, I think, theirs to just fund education. That needs to be realigned. There was a government plan to bring entities together, consolidation, like, for example, the youth fund, women fund, etc., being brought into one fund to ensure that there is rationalization. I think those are good plans which should be implemented to ensure that then with this particular budget, we get to see good results.
Yes, Dr. Grace.
Thank you. I'm wondering what to say. I have still so much. But just let me borrow the words from the PS, National Treasury. And I think what they have said, they listened to Kenyans last year. And they have used the recommendations that came in drafting this particular finance bill. And I think that is really good. And that goes to my opening remark that I'm so impressed by the level of engagement that Kenyans have had. And this is an encouragement to see that those recommendations that you put across, they may look like they have not been implemented all, but they really inform even moving forward. Okay. But also having said that, let me also just highlight two issues that we would also want to see them being brought to book. And one of them is enhancing the own source revenue collections, especially at county level. And one of the recommendations we have put across for that one is, can we be able to come up with one system that is able to be implemented across all the counties that will be very efficient and cost effective, and that will help in terms of enhancing the own source revenue collections at the source. Right. And finally, let me talk about the issue of governance and prudence in public financial management. And this is one of the proposals we had actually put across. That can we also have, especially at the counties, one of the, in the formula for the revenue allocation, can we have also prudence in the management of finances being put as part of the formula, so that those counties and those organizations that take up their finances, like absorption of their development fund, those who get clean audit reports and many other public financial management prudency implemented, then can we have them also getting a small share of the revenue as a result of that as an incentive. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Grace Kamau is the Chief Executive Officer, the Institute of Public Accountants, Certified Public Accountants, Kenya. Thank you for your time. Alex Kanyi is a tax expert at CDH Kenya, and Lydia Moss is Senior Manager at KPMG. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your time. Much appreciated for your input here. And thanks to you too. Up next is Seminar Citizen that will be coming to you live from Parliament, as well as Lulu Hassan, who will be here in studio, and the battery of reporters. At the National Treasury, Jimmy is with the CS, Melita Oletege is keeping an eye at the entrance of the National Treasury, Emmanuel To and team at the National Assembly, and Ben Kirui will be monitoring the streets around Nairobi Central Business District. Thank you for your company on this special day, Budget 2025-26. Good morning.